Okay, so I was watching a mainly facts video that ended up going ahead and telling a story about, a wife that's divorcing their husband because of apparently they ended up getting upset that, you know, she ended up pouring some sweet tea down the drain. And, apparently that was just one of the many things because there were other issues going on, which, by the way, going ahead and bringing the smallest point, and going ahead and not clarifying what all the other issues are, yeah, that's a tactic used by the person that's actually doing the manipulation. All right, it's to go ahead and garnish sympathy from other people to go ahead and be like, this is absolutely ridiculous. I don't understand what I possibly contributed to the situation to end up causing such a massive response. Manipulative as hell. But, you know, she goes ahead and clarifies, you know, I wanted to see, if they were going to argue and try to fight to keep me around. But they didn't. And she was upset about that. And she also ended up going ahead and saying that he was feeling more like a parental figure rather than a spouse. All right? So, those indicators right there, they tell me a few different things. All right? And apparently she's going back to school, for her RN. Congratulations, kudos on that for you. But to go ahead and clarify, ultimately, if you forgot the factor that you're an adult that's capable of making your own decisions, and, you were looking at your spouse more as a parental figure than a spouse, subconsciously you got some issues that you've been avoiding that ultimately you ended up going ahead and projecting your emotional need for nurturing, that at some point or another may or may not have ended up getting neglected, in some form. Not to mention that, but ultimately, with you getting upset that their response was, well, okay, let me know, we'll just get you moved out ASAP. You being upset by that response was them going ahead and not being manipulative, okay? That response right there was them acknowledging, okay, you're a human being with free will. You are allowed to dictate the decisions that you go ahead and make in life. You are allowed to determine what path and trajectory that your future's going on. And if I'm not part of that future, I'm going to accept it. Because ultimately, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to try to coerce you? Am I supposed to try to convince somebody that doesn't want to be part of my life to try to be part of my life? No, all that's going to do is cause you to be contentious and hostile. So why are they going to go do that? Literally, it's like signing up for an emotional beatdown that ultimately they would much rather go ahead and be like, well, you know what? You made a decision, and that decision is saying that you want to go ahead and unilaterally make your own decisions for your own life, and ultimately, there is no room in your life for me. All right? Ultimately, rather than being upset that they quote unquote weren't willing to fight for you, be happy for the factor that literally there are so many different times if you go ahead and look on a true crime, documentary, how many of those situations ended up getting stemmed from, I never thought that there would be so much involvement from the legal system in my life because of the factor that ultimately said person did not want to accept that I did not want to be part of their life. So because of that, they were determined to do whatever they could to force my will and to force me to be somewhere and be with somebody that I didn't want to. So take it as a win. All right? You didn't end up having your now ex-husband stalking you, you know? You didn't end up going ahead and having him have a breakdown, be like, I can't picture my future without you. And ultimately, now I need to go ahead and, since my future is not going to involve you, and I don't believe that there's a future that's worth having without you in it, then you don't get to have a future and I don't get to have a future, and decide to set up a whole murder-suicide situation. All right? Like, would you have preferred that? Like, recognize on its face the factor that the decision that your husband ended up making, or your ex-husband, was the emotionally healthy one. All right? I mean, literally, it could have gone so many different drastic, dramatic routes. And instead, he was like, I'm going to choose the route that's not emotionally volatile. Even for example, when everything ended up going ahead and falling apart, with separation and all that. Me, how did I handle it? I kept my hands to myself. I didn't get violent. I didn't get destructive. What I did, I used Dungeons & Dragons as a coping mechanism, despite how much I had to hear, oh my god, you're such a dork, you're so nerdy, da-da-da-da-da. Hey, I used that and video games to go ahead and get out all the volatile feelings that I had, so that way I would do no literal harm to any living creature. We're talking person or animal. So that being said, that was me going ahead and taking emotions that I understood, if not being directed out in a healthy outlet, because of recognizing that anger is a natural emotion. It's about how you utilize it that ends up going ahead and being unhealthy. Like, for example, when you go ahead and you just start just beating the crap out of people, that's not an emotionally healthy way to be able to handle a situation, Unless, of course, you're doing it in a way that's completely consented to. Like, for example, go sign up to, for a boxing gym. Go sign up to go ahead and do some form of martial arts and clarify to them, hey, I'm signing up for this because I'm feeling absolutely emotionally volatile and destructive. I'm going through a hard time in my life. I've got a lot of aggression and anger that I need to get out, and I understand that it's going to go ahead and be a disadvantage to me in this exact climate. And at that point, honestly, somebody that would end up being a good sensei or a good boxing coach will end up going ahead and saying, yes, that absolutely is going to put blinders on you and give you complete and total blind spots that any given one of my students, whether it be my worst student or my best student, will be able to exploit to their advantage. So if you're going to be coming with that mentality, understand, we're going to help you get your aggression out and we're going to help you get your anger out, but understand you're probably going to get tossed around like a rag doll for a while, until you actually do work that out. And then from there, you can actually go ahead and use the sport to be able to learn some emotional control. I'm saying, ultimately, there are different ways to be able to handle situations that, as long as people are choosing the willingness and the way that they are participants, is the determining factor of whether it's a healthy way of handling it or not healthy way of handling it. So if your complaint is the factor that your ex-husband, when you said you wanted to leave, ends up going ahead and saying, I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to try to convince you. Ultimately, maybe your complaint that you ended up having of you felt like you had more of a parental figure than you did of a husband, maybe your husband was feeling the exact same way and ended up thinking to himself, we're married, and ultimately I'm feeling like I'm having to go ahead and, parent this person that is a full-grown adult, but not wanting to act like a full-grown adult. So ultimately, if I'm wanting to go ahead and deal with children and everything, which you didn't mention if that was part of the dynamic or not, maybe you figured, what? This is a fresh start with somebody that I don't need to question if they want to be in my life, want to be in a dynamic with me, or anything like that. And ultimately, I could go ahead and move on. And maybe I might even end up going ahead and moving on to somebody that already has children, because I got so used to having to go ahead and act like a parent to the person that I was married to, that ultimately maybe that was my subconscious, paternal instincts kicking in, saying, hey, you're getting older. You want to be able to instill some wisdom into the next generation, and you want to be able to contribute something to the next generation, even if it's not your genetic imprint. Gain some self awareness.